Satan, the devil, Lucifer, Beelzebub. These are names that evoke dread for some, contempt for others, and even devotion for a few. But considering how strongly these names trigger most people's emotions, it's maybe surprising how little most people know about these infernal names' origins, or even what they in fact point to. First of all, let's address the common misconception that these names all point to a single entity. Anyone who's ever watched any popular culture media is likely to have come across the infamous fiery red figure with the bat's wings and the horns and the pointy tail and the goat's hooves and the pitched fork and the slicked black hair. And if you had nothing more than a passing interest in spirituality and the occult, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was a fictional being that some people imagine is real, that simply goes by many names. As with many images in this field, the figure actually has its origins in tribal feuds of the past, and the culture of a particular age asserting its dominance by demonizing the previous cultures that it has just dethroned. This particular image has Judeo-Christian origins, of course, and the reason I say Judeo-Christian and not just Christian here is because the Jewish tradition also has a specific part to play in the figure's inception. Let's talk about the wings first. Well, sure, we could point to Milton's interpretation of Lucifer falling from heaven, as Lucifer being a fallen angel. But Milton wrote Paradise Lost in the 17th century. This representation of the devil is much older than that. We could also point to the deeply political book of Revelation at the end of the Bible, written in the 1st century AD, in which one terrifying creature after another successively take over from each other to rule the world, being given power by the one that came before it and speaking in each other's voices. And of course, if that's not a political metaphor, I don't know what is. As an aside here, I'll point out that Revelation 17 verse 9 even gives a direct instruction that this is a metaphor, telling us that the 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. And later in verse 18, we're told that the woman who rides on the beast is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So a city that sits on 7 hills, right? So we don't even need to speculate whether this is a metaphor or not. The text itself tells us it is. Anyway, back to the topic. One of the beasts is described as looking like a dragon. And this makes sense in the context of Greco-Roman tradition, who attributed dragons and serpents to the underworld, the land of the dead who live on. There was no concept at the time of any kind of heaven up above and hell down below. Everyone who died went to the underworld to be judged by King Minos, Aeacus, and Rhadamanthus, and if they'd lived a good life, they'd go on to the fields of Eleusis. An ordinary life would earn them a place in the asphodel fields, and if they'd lived an unworthy life, they'd be sent to eke out a tortured existence in Tartarus under the rule of Zeus's brother Hades, known to the Romans as Pluto. But all 3 of these destinations were located in the underworld, and so the image of the serpent was associated with the underworld, nothing evil about it, just denoting this other place where the dead go. The heroes of old were depicted with their lower halves looking like serpents, precisely to say these guys live on in the underworld. And the greatest serpent of all, of course, is the winged dragon, that most chthonic of beings who lives deep in the belly of the mountain, hoarding gold. So the devil's wings aren't in fact the wings of a 19th century vampiric bat, but rather those of a dragon, a symbol of the earlier chthonic belief system that Christianity replaced with a completely new cosmology, with heaven up above and hell down below. So the dragon wings of the devil are actually a direct slur. It's saying, this being is so bad, it's as bad as the mistaken tradition that we replaced. Let's continue checking out those slurs. Naturally, the goat's legs and hooves allude to the nature god Pan, the satyr god of the natural world and of unbridled passions and ecstasies, all aspects of life to be tamed in this new Saturnian masculine age of Pisces. And the horns, of course. These are not the ram horns depicted in the book of Revelation. The devil is most often depicted with the horns of a bull. And that's a direct slur on the Mithraic cult, which was contending with the Jesus cult in Rome throughout the 1st century. Of course, we all know that the Mithras cult lost, as it mostly got the support of warriors, whereas the Jesus cult attracted women and children. And, well, there were more women and children than there were warriors. Mithras was a bull cult, and so we have this further sign of the conquered. But it should be clear by now that this description doesn't fit any of the descriptions of Satan or of Lucifer or of the so-called beast that are to be found in the Bible. This is a cultural amalgam of many symbols from defeated cultural rivals. The same situation can be found with Beelzebub, also known as Baal, the deity worshipped by the Canaanites, again deposed when the Hebrews took over the region and demonized Baal in the process. So now let's talk a little bit about Lucifer, the figure so beautifully described by Milton in his 17th century poem Paradise Lost, as the most beautiful angel fallen from grace. Where did that name Lucifer actually come from? In Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12, the narrator taunts a defeated king by telling him, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn." Helel ben Shachar are the actual Hebrew words here. Star, son of the morning. The one that shines brightest and which hails the arrival of light. The morning star. In other words, Venus. Well, the Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible from the 4th century simplified this down to a simple concept. The star that brings the dawn. The light bringer. Lucifera. Light bringer. And then finally in 1611, the translators of the King James version of the Bible look at that Latin version, Lucifera, the light bringer, make a connection to the rebellious Greek god Prometheus, the one who defied the gods to bring fire, light to humanity, and just concatenated the two words, giving it a capital first letter, turning it into a proper name, and suddenly from Venus the morning star we now have Lucifer. And from a simple insult, right, you were the brightest star and now you've fallen, we now have this entity fit to scare naughty children, and their naughty parents, by the way, into behaving themselves at home and, of course, within the kingdom. But come on, foolish fish, what about that bit when Satan tempts Jesus in the desert? That wasn't a made-up entity, was it? The entity who, according to Matthew chapter 4, tempted Jesus is most often translated into English as the devil. The original Greek of the New Testament gives diabolou, so the devil is a good translation here. It's mostly assumed that this would be the same entity sent by God to test Job's faith in the book of Job by tempting him into renouncing God. And that entity is Ha-Satan, or Satan, literally the adversary. And I guess we shouldn't have any doubt the adversary is a real thing. But this isn't the adversary of God. How can anything be the adversary of the totality? No, this is very much an aspect of God we're talking about. And if you find that that's a difficult pill to swallow, I recommend looking up Isaiah 45 verse 7. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So no, this isn't the adversary of God we're talking about. It's the adversary of ourselves. And as we know from Carl Jung, the adversary, which he calls the shadow self, is a very real thing. The aspect of ourselves that gets in the way of our projects, thwarts our dreams, and foils our plans despite our best intentions. And it's clearly an aspect of ourselves that should be recognized and worked with in order to more holistically exist. It certainly shouldn't be ignored, but from there to idolize it seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face. So why is it that some people idolize the devil? Okay, before I go into this, I want to address the common trope of ritual sacrifices and baby eating and so on, which provide great material for Hollywood movies on one end of the spectrum, and for far right-wing conspiracy theorists and frothy-mouthed evangelical pastors on the other side of the spectrum, I can assure you that those people's worryingly vivid imagination bears no relation to most Satanists' reality or experience. Are there crazy people out there? Murderers? Without the shadow of a doubt. Does Satanism require or even ever involve these heinous acts? No. I mean, don't get me wrong, LARPers will continue to be LARPers, but that's a different thing altogether. Let's not confuse kinky roleplay with actual murder, or with spirituality for that matter. So what is Satanism then, if it's not what they show in the movies or in the wet dreams of budding neo-Nazis? Well, if we take for granted that the vast majority of Satanists are people in their teens, whose research definitely hasn't gone much further than watching The Simpsons or South Park the movie, and are mainly concerned with provoking a reaction from their father's new ultra-religious girlfriend, or making it loud and clear that they'd prefer to spend their Sunday mornings hanging out with their friends. And if we also take for granted that there is also a much smaller group who actually follow the philosophy of Anton LaVey, an atheist provocateur from the mid-20th century who chose to snub the establishment, which he saw as being too deeply involved with religion, by pretending to worship its arch-villain, Satan, whom he didn't believe in any more than he believed in God. So if those two groups account for the majority of those who claim to worship the devil, who's that small remaining minority? Well, some people are actually quite aware of the dubious origins of the concepts of Satan and Lucifer, and they understand that these entities are egregores, in other words, real and indeed powerful entities, precisely because people have been thinking of them as real and powerful entities for centuries. You can check out my video on servitors to get a taste of how belief in an entity can actually bring such an entity into existence, because it does definitely work. These are usually people who have been deeply traumatized by their experience of the church. Now, I hope I don't need to paint you a picture of how that might have happened in the past, and unfortunately still happens in the present. And they embrace this adversarial path as a reassertion of their own power, of their own agency, in direct opposition to what they've experienced of the church as an oppressive, even malevolent force in their own lives, a manifestation of rebellion, so to speak. Now, regardless of how wholesome or unwholesome you may feel this to be, I'll point out that Jesus himself calls himself the morning star in Revelation 22, verse 16. So maybe there is something to be said for the spirit of rebellion and freedom, the one who fell from heaven for defying the established order, and the one who was crucified for defying the established order, may not be as distant from each other as they may seem. Well, something to think about maybe. In the next video, we'll talk about the Demiurge and Sethian Gnosticism, which takes this conversation even deeper. But for now, I just want to say thank you so much for staying with me throughout this video. Please leave a thumbs up. Please subscribe down below if you haven't done so already. And there are many ways in which you can support the channel if you are not doing so already. And if you are already supporting the channel, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. Your support means the world to me. I can only continue making these videos thanks to your support. Thank you very particularly to David Venturini, Caitlin Kopok, and Amon, the channel's 3-level Infinity Lux Eterna members. Thank you so much for your incredible generosity. And also thank you in particular to the level 3 Magister Venerabilis members, whose names are scrolling up on the left side of the screen that you can see here. If you've recently become a member and you're interested in joining the Foolish Fish Discord server where we discuss many different topics, there are about 300 different channels at the moment, all carefully curated by our fantastic team of moderators. Then I'll invite you to check out the description of the video and scroll all the way down where there are descriptions on how to join the Discord server if you're a YouTube member or if you're a Patreon member. And if you're not a member, that's also where you'll be able to see some of the perks that members get, such as being involved in my daily planetary ritual and access to the members-only videos, such as the path-working guided meditation videos that I made exclusively for members on the level 2 and up. You might also be interested in the fact that I now give consultations. If you have any topics that you'd like me to personally, directly help you with, you can book a 1-hour video conversation with me, and once again, the details on how to do that are in the descriptions and also in the top pinned comment. Thank you all ever so much for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you very soon with another one. Take care of yourselves and of each other.